What would you do if a millionaire publicly humiliated you in front of 300 people? Called you a failure? Offered you charity like you were some kind of beggar? Most people would fight back immediately, but Marcus Sullivan just stood there and took it, month after month, insult after insult. His own children were ashamed of him. His ex-wife watched in silence as her new millionaire husband, Bradley Kingsworth, destroyed Marcus's reputation piece by piece. You see, everyone thought Marcus was just a struggling landscaper living paycheck to paycheck. His old Honda Civic, his simple clothes, his modest apartment, everything screamed financial failure to people like Bradley. But here's what Bradley didn't know. That broke single dad he was mocking, the man he offered $10,000 to like some kind of charity case, Marcus Sullivan had sold his tech company for $8.3 billion. And the night Bradley decided to humiliate him one final time at the city's most exclusive charity gala, well, that's when this millionaire learned the difference between having money and having class. This is the story of the most satisfying comeuppance you'll ever hear. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for the moment when Bradley Kingsworth realizes exactly who he's been messing with, because sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the most powerful. The champagne glass clinked against the microphone, creating that sharp crystal sound that cuts through conversation like a knife. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to our school's fundraising goal this year. Marcus Sullivan stood at the back of St. Catherine's Academy Gymnasium, his worn leather jacket a stark contrast to the sea of designer suits around him. The jacket was 10 years old, but well-maintained, like everything in his life. Simple, functional, honest. His 16-year-old daughter Emma shifted uncomfortably beside him, her St. Catherine's blazer perfectly pressed, but her face flushed with anticipation. She knew what was coming. Bradley Kingsworth III adjusted his platinum cufflinks and smiled that practiced smile he had perfected over 45 years of getting his way. The smile never reached his eyes. It never had to. Of course, we understand that not everyone can contribute at the platinum level, Bradley continued, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension that wealthy men mistake for charm. Some of us are still struggling to make ends meet in these challenging economic times. The words hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. 300 parents, teachers, and community leaders all suddenly found him very interesting. Emma grabbed his arm. "Dad, can we just go, please?" Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. "No, sweetheart. We stay." Bradley's confidence grew with each passing second of awkward silence. He had the room exactly where he wanted it. "I was just telling my wife Tori earlier about how admirable it is that some parents prioritize time over financial contribution. Though I do have to wonder how a landscaper manages to afford St. Catherine's tuition." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd like stones skipping across water. Marcus watched his ex-wife Tori shift uncomfortably at Bradley's side, her eyes studying the polished gymnasium floor as if it held the secrets of the universe. Tori had been beautiful at 18 when they met in college. She was still beautiful at 39, but now her beauty came with a price tag that Marcus had once been happy to pay. Tonight, she wore a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The emerald earrings Bradley had given her for their first anniversary caught the gymnasium lights like green fire. "Perhaps," Bradley's voice grew louder, more confident with each syllable, "we should implement a sliding scale for participation. You know, adjusted for individual circumstances and capabilities." More laughter this time, not nervous anymore. Some parents were actually enjoying the show. Marcus looked down at his daughter. Emma was brilliant, kind, and tonight she was completely ashamed of her father. Something twisted in his chest like a rusty tumor. For the first time in 3 years, he questioned everything he had built, everything he had chosen, everything he believed about raising children with authentic values. His 14-year-old son James appeared at his other side, having abandoned the science fair booth where he had been demonstrating a robotics project he had built himself. James was small for his age, but had their mother's quick intelligence and his father's quiet determination. "Dad," James whispered, his voice barely audible above the murmur of 300 people pretending not to stare. "Why is he doing this to you?" Marcus had no answer that would make sense to a 14-year-old boy who just wanted his father to fight back. How do you explain to your son that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is absorb someone else's cruelty without returning it? How do you teach a teenager that dignity matters more than winning? Bradley raised his voice to address the entire room. I think we should all recognize Marcus Sullivan for his dedication to his children's education despite his obvious financial limitations. It takes real character to keep showing up when you clearly cannot keep up. The applause was polite but devastating. 300 people clapping for Marcus Sullivan, the struggling single father who was doing his best but clearly falling short. The sound echoed off the gymnasium walls like the hollow thud of dirt hitting a coffin lid. Marcus felt his phone buzz in his pocket, a text message from his assistant Sarah Mitchell. Board meeting moved to tonight. The Singapore acquisition needs your approval by morning. 8.2 billion is on the table. He silenced the phone without reading the rest. Emma was crying now. Not the dramatic tears of a teenage girl denied something she wanted, but the quiet, helpless tears of a child watching her father be destroyed in public. She understood, perhaps better than James, that this moment would follow them for months. Her classmates would remember. Their parents would whisper. The story would grow in the telling until Marcus Sullivan became a cautionary tale about dreams deferred and ambitions unfulfilled. Thank you all so much for your continued support of St. Catherine's Academy, Bradley concluded, his voice dripping with false humility. And especially thank you to those families who give what they can, even when what they can give is not very much. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several parents made a point of stopping by Marcus with encouraging words that felt like salt in an open wound. Don't let him get to you, Marcus. We all know you work hard. Your kids are lucky to have a father who cares so much. Hang in there, things will get better. Each well-meaning comment was another reminder that everyone in this room now saw him as someone who needed their pity. Marcus Sullivan, the man who had once been profiled in Forbes magazine as one of the most innovative tech entrepreneurs of his generation, was now the object of charitable concern from people who made a fraction of his annual charitable donations. Mirror technique moment. Marcus found himself doing what every parent does when they realize they might be failing their children in ways they never intended. He stood perfectly still while chaos swirled around him, feeling completely alone despite being surrounded by people. The gymnasium emptied slowly, but he remained frozen, unable to move forward or backward. Validation whisper. The worst part about being misjudged isn't that people get you wrong. It's wondering if maybe they're seeing something you refuse to admit about yourself. The parking lot conversation was worse than the public humiliation. Marcus, I am so sorry. Tori's voice cracked as she approached his 10-year-old Honda Civic. The car was immaculate inside and out, maintained with the same careful attention Marcus gave everything in his life, but it looked ancient next to Bradley's new Mercedes S-Class. Sorry for what exactly? Marcus asked quietly, opening the back door for Emma and James. His children slid into the car without their usual chatter about the evening's events. Bradley doesn't know when to stop sometimes. He gets carried away. Sometimes? Marcus straightened up, looking at his ex-wife properly for the first time in months. Tori, that wasn't getting carried away. That was calculated humiliation performed for an audience. Bradley appeared at Tori's shoulder like a shadow with a $1,000 suit and a $500 haircut. Did I hear someone taking my name in vain? Bradley, please, Tori said, but her voice held no real authority. She had learned, Marcus realized, to manage her husband rather than confront him. It was a familiar dynamic that made his chest tight with old grief. Please what? Bradley's smile was sharp as broken glass. Please don't point out that your ex-husband is struggling. Please don't mention that our children deserve better than this. Our children? The words came out of Marcus before he could stop them. Bradley's expression shifted into something uglier, more honest. They are my stepchildren now, Marcus, and frankly, they deserve better than watching their biological father scrape by on lawn mowing income. Marcus felt James tense in the back seat. His son was listening to every word, absorbing every casual cruelty like a sponge soaking up poison. I choose how I spend my money, Marcus said carefully. just like I choose how I spend my time. Both go to things that matter. Bradley laughed, and the sound was like fingernails on chalkboard. Right, like your community college fund? Bradley, Tori's warning tone was sharper now, but still ineffective. What? I'm just saying, maybe it's time Marcus faced some hard truths about his situation. Look at yourself, man. Bradley gestured at Marcus's simple clothes, his modest car, his children who were clearly embarrassed by the entire scene. Worn-out jacket, ancient Honda, working with your hands for minimum wage. Meanwhile, your ex-wife lives in a mansion, your kids attend the best private school in the state, and you live in what? A rental apartment? Marcus got behind the wheel without responding. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. The Jakarta expansion is ahead of schedule. Profit projections up 12% for Q4. Also, your Stanford donation cleared. They're naming the computer science building after your foundation. He silenced the phone and started the engine. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Emma was quiet until they reached the first red light. The silence in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. Dad, I need to ask you something. What is it, sweetheart? Are we poor? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter in the rear-view mirror. Emma wore a St. Catherine's blazer that cost more than most people spend on a month of groceries. Her backpack was designer leather, purchased by Tori. Her phone was newer than his, but she was asking if they were poor. Define poor, he said finally. Like, are we broke? Because Ashley Morrison told me her dad looked you up online, and he said you don't even own your apartment. He said we're basically living on charity from Mom's new husband. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. Ashley Morrison's father was a local real estate developer who thought researching other people's financial situations was appropriate dinner table conversation. I rent because I choose to rent, Emma. But why choose the harder way? James spoke up from beside his sister. Why choose the way that makes people feel sorry for us? The light turned green, but Marcus sat there for a moment longer than necessary. How do you explain to your children that you once owned a penthouse in Manhattan, a house in the Hamptons, and a vacation compound in Aspen? How do you tell them that you gave it all up because you wanted them to understand the difference between having things and being happy? Some choices look harder from the outside, he said finally, but they're actually easier in the long run. That doesn't make sense, Dad. Emma's voice held a note of frustration that broke his heart. Nothing about tonight makes sense. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. Their apartment complex was clean but modest, surrounded by mature oak trees and small gardens that Marcus maintained himself. He had chosen this place specifically because it felt like home rather than an investment. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors were kind, and Emma and James had grown up here feeling secure and loved. Tonight, pulling into the parking space next to Mrs. Henderson's ancient Toyota, Marcus wondered if security and love were enough. Inside their three-bedroom apartment, Emma went straight to her room and closed the door. James hesitated in the living room, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how to begin. Dad, can I ask you something without you getting upset? I never get upset when you ask me questions, James. Why don't you fight back? Marcus sat down on their comfortable but unremarkable couch and looked at his son. James had Tori's quick intelligence but his own stubborn sense of justice. At 14, he was beginning to understand that the world was not always fair, but he had not yet learned that fairness and justice were not the same thing. What would fighting back look like to you? I don't know, maybe tell Mr. Bradley that he's not actually our dad. Maybe remind everyone that you pay for our school just like everyone else. Maybe stop letting him make you look small. The last phrase hit Marcus hardest because it came from his son's clear-eyed assessment of the evening's events. In James's world, his father had been made to look small and had chosen not to defend himself. James, do you think I look small tonight? His son considered the question seriously. You look sad, and that made me sad, and that made me angry. Marcus pulled James onto the couch beside him. What if I told you that sometimes looking small is the strongest thing you can do? I would say that sounds like something adults say when they don't want to admit they're scared. The honesty was brutal and perfect. Marcus realized that his 14-year-old son had just summarized the central question of his entire approach to parenting. Was he teaching his children authentic values, Or was he hiding from confrontation behind a philosophy that sounded noble but felt cowardly? Mirror technique moment. Later that night, Marcus sat in his small home office staring at his laptop screen. The computer was worth more than most people's cars, but he had chosen a simple black case that looked unremarkable. Everything in his life was designed to look unremarkable. He wondered, not for the first time, if he had confused being humble with being invisible. Validation whisper. The hardest part about choosing a different path isn't that people don't understand it. It's that sometimes you stop understanding it yourself. Emma could not sleep. At 12:30 in the morning, she crept into the living room where her father sat surrounded by papers that definitely did not look like landscaping invoices. The documents were thick, official-looking, with letterheads she did not recognize and numbers that made her eyes widen. "Dad, what are you working on?" Marcus quickly closed the laptop and gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Nothing important, sweetheart. You should be sleeping." "Those papers don't look like lawnmower receipts." Marcus studied his daughter's face. Emma had always been too intelligent for easy explanations and too persistent for comfortable deflection. At 16, she combined her mother's analytical mind with his own stubborn curiosity. It was a formidable combination that had gotten her into advanced placement classes and would probably get him into trouble tonight. "Sometimes I do consulting work." "Technology consulting." "What kind of technology consulting?" "Database management, security protocols, corporate system integration." He paused, watching her process the technical terms. "Boring computer work that pays better than landscaping but isn't steady enough to rely on." Emma sat down beside him on the second-hand couch they had bought at a furniture warehouse 3 years ago. The couch was comfortable and well-made, but it looked exactly like what it was, a practical choice made by someone who cared more about function than appearance. "Dad, can I tell you something without you getting weird about it?" "I never get weird when you tell me things, Emma. I don't care that we don't have a mansion like Mom and Bradley. I don't care that our car is old or that our apartment isn't fancy, but I do care that Bradley made you look sad tonight, and I care that Mom just stood there and let him do it." When the observation was so precisely accurate that Marcus felt something crack in his chest. His 16-year-old daughter had seen straight through the evening's performance to the emotional truth underneath. "I wasn't sad, sweetheart." "Yes, you were. And Mom was sad too, but different sad, like she was remembering something she wished she could forget." Emma had inherited more than intelligence from both her parents. She had inherited the ability to read people's emotional states with uncomfortable accuracy. It was a gift that would serve her well in life and was currently making this conversation very difficult. "What do you think Mom was remembering?" Emma considered the question seriously. "I think she was remembering when you two were happy together. Before Bradley, before the divorce, before everything got complicated." Marcus felt the familiar weight of memories he had spent 3 years trying to organize into something manageable. His marriage to Tori had ended not in dramatic explosion, but in slow erosion. Success had changed them both, but in opposite directions. The more money he made, the more he wanted to simplify their lives. The more successful his company became, the more Tori wanted to expand their social circle and increase their public profile. "Do you remember living in the big house?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded. "Sort of. I remember a swimming pool in a room that was just for playing. I remember Mom wearing fancy dresses to parties and you wearing suits that looked uncomfortable." "Do you miss it?" "I miss you and Mom being happy at the same time. I don't miss the house." The next morning, while Marcus was at his legitimate landscaping job, Emma made a decision that would accelerate everything. She had inherited her father's methodical approach to problem solving and her mother's determination to get answers. The combination made her a formidable researcher. She started with simple searches. Marcus Sullivan, landscaping, brought up his business website and several positive customer reviews. Nothing unusual there. But Emma was persistent and had learned advanced search techniques in her AP computer science class. She tried Marcus Sullivan Technology Consultant and found more interesting results. Patent filings with his name, consulting contracts with major corporations, references to something called Tech Founder that made her pulse quicken. When she searched Marcus Sullivan Tech Founder, Her hands started shaking. The Forbes article from 2 years earlier was titled, "The Mystery Billionaire, Marcus Sullivan's $8.3 billion exit strategy." Emma read it 3 times before the information fully penetrated her understanding of reality. Her father, who drove a 10-year-old Honda and worried about spending money on new clothes, had sold his company for $8.3 billion. Her father, who let Bradley Kingsworth humiliate him in public, was worth more money than most small countries. Her father, who had taught her that material things were less important than relationships and character, was one of the wealthiest people in America. Emma sat in the school library, staring at her phone screen until the words began to blur. Everything she thought she knew about her family, her parents' divorce, her mother's new marriage, and her father's choices suddenly rearranged itself into a completely different picture. The article described Tech Founder as the most innovative database security company of the past decade, and Marcus as a visionary entrepreneur who revolutionized how corporations protect sensitive information. There were quotes from tech industry leaders calling him brilliant and ahead of his time. There was speculation about his next venture and admiration for his decision to step away from the spotlight to focus on family and philanthropy. Emma realized she was crying not from sadness, but from a confusing mixture of pride, anger, and complete bewilderment. Her father was not just successful, he was extraordinarily, impossibly successful, and he had hidden it from everyone. That afternoon, she confronted him in his small home office behind the kitchen. Marcus looked up from his laptop, which Emma now realized was probably worth more than most people's cars despite its unremarkable appearance. "Dad, we need to talk." Something in her voice made him save his work and close the computer immediately. "What's wrong, Em?" She placed her phone on his desk with the Forbes article displayed on the screen. Marcus stared at it for a long moment. When he looked up at his daughter, his expression was resigned rather than surprised. "How much of it did you read?" "All of it. Dad, you sold Tech Founder for $8 billion? 8.3 billion, to be precise. And you're still driving a Honda Civic and living in a rental apartment?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. For the first time in 3 years, he looked genuinely tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally weary in a way that made Emma's chest tight with concern. "Emma, can you keep a secret?" "From who?" "From everyone. Your brother, your mother, your friends, everyone." Emma nodded, though she was not entirely sure what she was agreeing to. "I started Tech Founder when you were 5 years old," Marcus began, his voice steady but soft. "Built it in our garage while your mother thought I was just fixing computers for neighbors. By the time you were 10, we had 300 employees and offices in 12 cities. Emma sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell and stop him from finally telling her the truth. "By your 12th birthday, we were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By your 14th, we were approaching $1 billion. The company was successful beyond my wildest dreams, and it was destroying my family." He opened his laptop and showed Emma photographs she had never seen. Their family at corporate events and award ceremonies. Her mother in evening gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Herself as a child wearing clothes that had probably been featured in fashion magazines. "You were 8 when you asked me why we needed 4 cars. 9 when you asked why you couldn't play with the regular kids at school anymore. 10 when you told me you wished we were normal like other families." Emma stared at the photographs. The little girl in the pictures looked happy, but somehow distant, like she was performing rather than playing. "The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences," Marcus continued quietly. "But the real reason your mother left was because I wanted to sell Tech Founder and live simply. She wanted to build an empire and become a permanent fixture in high society." "So you chose us over the money?" "I chose authenticity over performance. I sold Tech Founder 6 months after the divorce was finalized, kept enough to ensure you and James would never want for anything. College funds, trust funds, emergency accounts. The rest goes to foundations and charitable organizations, mostly anonymously." Emma's mind raced through the implications. "But why the landscaping business? Why let people think you're struggling?" "Because I wanted to know who you and James would become without the pressure of extraordinary wealth. I wanted to give you normal teenage problems instead of billionaire children problems." "And Mom, does she know?" Marcus shook his head. She knows I'm not struggling financially. The child support payments alone would tell her that. But she assumes I kept a few million from the sale for security. She has no idea about the full amount. Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing information that fundamentally altered her understanding of everything. Finally, she spoke. Dad, Bradley is making James embarrassed to bring friends over to our apartment. I know. And he's making Mom look foolish at her social events by treating you like charity case. I know that too. So what are we going to do about it? Marcus looked at his 16-year-old daughter and saw himself reflected in her determined expression. Emma had inherited his sense of justice and Tori's strategic thinking. The combination was going to make her either very successful or very dangerous. Possibly both. We're going to teach Bradley Kingsworth about the difference between having money and having class. Mirror technique moment. That evening, Marcus stood at his kitchen counter making grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner. The ritual was soothing and familiar. Butter melting in the pan, bread turning golden brown, cheese bubbling perfectly. He had made thousands of these sandwiches over the years, and they had never tasted better than when shared with his children at their small kitchen table. Some pleasures he realized could not be improved by money. Validation whisper. The hardest choice isn't between having money and not having money. It's between using money as a tool and letting money use you. Marcus called his old college friend Mike Rodriguez at 7 in the morning, knowing that Mike would already be awake and caffeinated. Detective Rodriguez had always been an early riser and a straight talker, two qualities that had made him an excellent friend and an even better police officer. Jesus Christ, Marcus. It's 7 a.m. on a Saturday. This better involve blood or felony charges. Remember Bradley Kingsworth, the restaurant owner who married Tori? The pompous jackass with the fake British accent? What about him? Marcus filled Mike in on the fundraiser humiliation, Bradley's public charity performance, and Emma's discovery of the Forbes article. Mike's response was immediate and colorful. So when do we destroy this clown? Because I have some ideas, and they're all perfectly legal. That's not the plan, Mike, ma'am. Come on, Marcus. You could buy his entire restaurant chain with the money you spend on coffee. You could ruin him by Tuesday morning and be playing golf by lunch. I'm not interested in ruining anyone. I'm interested in protecting my children. Same thing, isn't it? Marcus thought about that question as he hung up. Was protecting his children the same thing as destroying Bradley? And if it was, what did that say about his commitment to teaching them authentic values? His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Mitchell, his assistant. The Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala is next Saturday evening. I noticed from the society pages that the Kingsworths will be hosting a table. Interesting timing for a potential public appearance. Marcus stared at the text message. The Hartwell Foundation had been named after Tori's father, Bobby Hartwell, who had started as a union electrician and built a small construction company through determination and honest work. Bobby had always liked Marcus, even after the divorce. More importantly, Bobby had always seen through people's pretensions to their actual character. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind like a storm cloud gathering on a clear horizon. Meanwhile, across town in a marble kitchen that cost more than most people's houses, Tori sat drinking coffee from a cup that had been hand-painted by Italian artisans. The coffee was excellent and the cup was beautiful, but neither could distract her from the growing discomfort she felt about her husband's treatment of her ex-husband. Bradley, you were unnecessarily cruel to Marcus last night. Bradley looked up from his Wall Street Journal, which he read every morning as part of his carefully cultivated image as a serious businessman. Was I? The man needed a reality check. He's a good father to our children. He's an adequate provider at best. There's a significant difference between being a good father and being a successful man. Tori thought about Marcus as she had known him during their marriage. He had never missed a school play or soccer game, never raised his voice to the children, or made them feel anything less than completely loved. He had built a billion-dollar company while still being home for dinner most nights and weekend family activities. Maybe success isn't just about money, she said quietly. Bradley laughed and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass, spoken like someone who has never lived without financial security. Trust me, darling, poverty is not a virtue, regardless of what your ex-husband's philosophy might suggest. But Tori remembered something Marcus had said during their marriage, back when she still listened to his ideas about life and values. The moment you start measuring people by their bank accounts is the moment you stop seeing their humanity. She had thought he was being naive then. Now she wondered if he had been wise. That afternoon, Emma made a decision that would accelerate everything. She called her grandfather. "Grandpa Bobby, it's Emma. Can I ask you something about Dad?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "Did you know he was wealthy when he and Mom got divorced?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Wealthy how? Emma told her grandfather everything she had discovered about tech founder, the $8.3 billion sale, and her father's decision to live simply despite his extraordinary success. When she finished, Bobby Hartwell was quiet for so long that Emma thought the call had been disconnected. "Grandpa, are you there?" "I'm here, Emma. I'm just processing what you've told me." "Did you know about the money?" "I knew he wasn't struggling financially. A man who pays for private school tuition, never blinks at medical expenses, and sends child support. That's triple what the court ordered is clearly not living paycheck to paycheck. I figured he had money set aside from his business." "But you didn't know how much?" $8 billion. Bobby's voice was faint with amazement. "No, sweetheart, I had no idea it was that much." "Grandpa, Bradley is being mean to Dad, really mean, and it's making James embarrassed and Mom upset." "What kind of mean?" Emma told her grandfather about the fundraiser humiliation and Bradley's pattern of public condescension. By the end of her account, Bobby's breathing had changed in a way that made Emma think of gathering thunderstorms. "Emma, honey, your father is a better man than most people deserve to know. But every man has his limits, and every man has his breaking point." "What do you mean?" "I mean Bradley Kingsworth is about to learn the difference between old money and real money. And that difference is bigger than he could possibly imagine." That evening, Marcus decided it was time to tell James the truth as well. His son was too intelligent and too observant to be kept in the dark much longer, and the events at the fundraiser had clearly affected him deeply. They were driving to James's soccer practice when his son brought up the subject. "Dad, Emma's been acting weird all week, like she knows some big secret that she's not supposed to tell." Marcus glanced at James in the rearview mirror. At 14, his son was caught between childhood and adolescence, old enough to understand complex situations, but young enough to be hurt by adult cruelty. "What kind of secret?" "I don't know exactly, but yesterday she asked me if I remembered living in a big house when I was little." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Do you remember that?" "Sort of. I remember a swimming pool and a game room with a really big television. But I figured I was probably just remembering someone else's house." They pulled into the soccer complex parking lot, but Marcus did not get out immediately. Instead, he turned off the engine and faced his son. "James, there's something I need to tell you about our family's situation." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus gave his son an age-appropriate version of the truth about Tech Founder, the sale, and his decision to live simply despite their extraordinary wealth. James listened in complete silence, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like relief. "So we're rich?" James asked finally. "We're financially secure. There's an important difference." "But Dad, if you have all this money, why do I have to mow neighbors' lawns to buy video games? Why can't I get the new iPhone like everyone else at school?" Marcus had anticipated this question, because earning things teaches you their value in a way that being given things never can. "That's easy for you to say. You could buy Apple Incorporated if you wanted to. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Having the power to change your circumstances and choosing not to use that power can be a form of strength." James was quiet for several minutes, absorbing this information and its implications. Finally, he spoke again. "Is that why Mom left? Because you wouldn't buy expensive things anymore?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. His 14-year-old son had cut straight through years of careful explanations to the emotional core of his parents' divorce. "Your mother left because we wanted different things from life. She wanted the big house back. She wanted security that came from visible success. I wanted authenticity that came from invisible success." James nodded slowly, processing this distinction. "Dad, are you going to tell Bradley who you really are?" "Do you think I should?" "I think he's been mean to you because he thinks he's better than you. but you actually are more successful than him, just not in the way he thinks success should look. Marcus felt something settle in his chest like a puzzle piece finally finding its correct position. His son understood the fundamental issue better than many adults would. James, if I handle this situation with Bradley, it might change things for our family. People might treat us differently when they know the truth. Different how? They might be nicer to us because of our money instead of because of who we are as people. James was quiet for the rest of the drive home from soccer practice. As they pulled into their apartment complex parking lot, he turned to his father with a serious expression. Dad, I don't care if we never have a mansion again. I just don't want that man making you look sad anymore. Mirror technique moment. That night, Marcus found himself standing in his small bathroom, looking at his reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. It was the same routine he had followed for 3 years, brushing his teeth, washing his face, avoiding extended eye contact with himself. Tonight, though, he studied his own expression and wondered what his children saw when they looked at him. Did they see strength or resignation? Wisdom or fear? Validation, whisper. The hardest part about making difficult choices is that you never know if you're being principled or just being stubborn until the consequences play out. Monday morning brought the first crack in Bradley Kingsworth's carefully constructed confidence. His restaurant manager, David Chen, called at 8:15, just as Bradley was finishing his breakfast of steel-cut oats and organic blueberries. Mr. Kingsworth, we need to discuss the lease renewal for the downtown location immediately. The lease isn't due for renewal for another 6 months, David. Why the urgency? The building sold over the weekend. The new owner is offering us a 5-year renewal, but at triple the current monthly rate. Bradley nearly choked on his imported coffee. Triple? That's completely unreasonable. Who purchased the building? Some investment company called Hartwell Holdings? They seem to have bought several properties in the downtown corridor. Bradley felt his blood pressure spike. Hartwell was Tori's maiden name, but Bobby Hartwell was a small-scale contractor, not a real estate mogul with the capital to purchase million-dollar commercial properties. Get me the complete details immediately. I want to know everything about this Hartwell Holdings company. An hour later, Bradley sat in his home office staring at documents that fundamentally challenged his understanding of the local business landscape. Hartwell Holdings had purchased not just his restaurant building, but 6 other prime commercial properties in the downtown district. The total investment had to exceed $20 million, and the purchases had been completed with cash offers that closed within 48 hours. His phone rang before he could fully process the implications. Bradley, it's your sister, Catherine. Catherine Kingsworth managed event planning for the city's social elite, which meant she knew everyone's business and most of their secrets. If anyone could explain the sudden appearance of Hartwell Holdings, it would be Catherine. Cat, I need information about a company called Hartwell Holdings. That's actually why I'm calling, Catherine interrupted. The Hartwell Foundation just received the largest single donation in their 30-year history. Anonymous contributor, but the donation was routed through something called the Tech Innovation Charitable Foundation. Bradley's head began to spin. How large? $50 million, Bradley. $50 million donated anonymously to a blue-collar charitable foundation by someone with connections to the tech industry. Who made the donation? That's the interesting part. The donor specifically requested to remain anonymous, but asked for a table at Saturday's gala. They want to be seated adjacent to the Kingsworth party. Before Bradley could fully absorb this information, his other phone line began ringing. His accountant's name appeared on the caller ID. Bradley, we have a situation. The Internal Revenue Service just requested additional documentation regarding your restaurant's reported income for the past 3 years. What kind of situation? We've never had problems with the IRS. Someone filed an anonymous tip suggesting significant discrepancies between your reported revenue and your actual cash transactions. It's probably nothing, but we'll need to provide complete documentation for every transaction over the past 36 months. Bradley hung up both phone calls and poured himself a scotch despite the fact that it was barely 11 o'clock in the morning. Across town, Marcus was having a very different kind of morning. He sat in his small home office reviewing quarterly reports from the various charitable foundations he supported anonymously. The numbers were encouraging: literacy programs in underprivileged communities, scholarship funds for first-generation college students, medical research initiatives, and environmental conservation projects. In the past 3 years, he had donated more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, and every dollar had gone to causes that aligned with his values. The downtown properties are secured, Sarah Mitchell reported during their weekly telephone conference. Mr. Hartwell was surprisingly cooperative. He seemed almost amused by the entire situation. Bobby had always possessed a dry sense of humor and a healthy skepticism about people who confuse wealth with worth. Marcus imagined his former father-in-law was enjoying the irony of the situation. What about the foundation donation? Processed as requested, anonymous as always. The gala coordinator mentioned they're seating you at table 13, directly adjacent to the Kingsworth party as you specified. Perfect. And the other matter? The IRS audit request was filed this morning, all completely legitimate, I want to be clear. Mr. Kingsworth's restaurants have been underreporting cash transactions for approximately 2 years. He'll survive the investigation, but it will be expensive and embarrassing. Marcus felt a brief twinge of something that might have been guilt. Sarah, ensure that the audit process is completely fair and by the book. No preferential treatment in either direction. Understood, sir. After ending the call, Marcus sat quietly in his office, looking at the framed photograph on his desk. The picture showed him with Emma and James at a baseball game the previous spring. All three of them were laughing at something James had said, probably a joke that was funnier to them than it would be to anyone else. They looked genuinely happy in a way that had nothing to do with money or status or social position. Was he protecting this happiness? Or was he risking it by finally deciding to take action against Bradley? His phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. Dad, James is asking questions about why you never seem worried about money or bills. I think it might be time to tell him everything we talked about. Marcus stared at the message. His children were intelligent enough to notice inconsistencies and persistent enough to seek explanations. The careful balance he had maintained for 3 years was beginning to shift. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Meanwhile, in her marble kitchen, Tori was having her own moment of clarity. She had spent the morning reviewing their family's financial statements and social calendar, and the contrast between her current life and her memories of marriage to Marcus was becoming impossible to ignore. During their marriage, money had been a tool they used to create experiences and support causes they cared about. Now, money was a performance she participated in to maintain social position. The difference was subtle but significant, like the difference between wearing clothes that fit well and wearing clothes that looked expensive. Bradley entered the kitchen carrying his laptop and wearing an expression she had learned to recognize as trouble brewing. We need to discuss our situation, he announced. What situation? Someone is playing games with our family, and I intend to find out who. Tori listened as Bradley explained the property purchases, the anonymous donation to her father's foundation, and the IRS audit request. As he talked, she found herself thinking about Marcus's approach to problems. Her ex-husband had always been methodical and strategic, preferring to understand situations completely before taking action. Maybe these are just coincidences, she suggested. Bradley's laugh was harsh. Tori, someone with serious money and serious connections is sending us a message. The question is who and what they want. As her husband continued his speculation, Tori realized she already knew the answer to both questions. She just wasn't sure she was ready to accept the implications. Mirror technique moment. That evening, Marcus found himself doing something he had done countless times during his marriage. Standing at his bedroom window at 2 a.m, looking out at the quiet neighborhood and wondering if he was making the right decisions for the people he loved most. The streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot, and everything was peaceful and still. But inside his chest, he felt the familiar tension of knowing that change was coming, whether he was ready for it or not. Validation. Whisper. The worst part about having real power isn't the responsibility that comes with it. It's knowing that once you use it, everything changes forever. Tuesday brought more complications for Bradley and more clarity for Marcus's family. James had spent the previous evening processing the revelation about his father's wealth, and he approached the breakfast table with questions that demonstrated both his intelligence and his growing understanding of complex adult situations. Dad, if you have enough money to solve our problems, why don't you? Marcus looked up from his simple breakfast of oatmeal and fresh fruit. What problems do you think we have that money would solve? People treating you like you're not successful. Bradley making you look weak in front of everyone. Mom being stuck in a marriage where her husband embarrasses her by being mean to you. The last observation surprised Marcus with its accuracy. At 14, James was already learning to read social dynamics and emotional undercurrents with uncomfortable precision. James, money can solve some problems, but it creates others. And sometimes the problems it creates are worse than the problems that it solves. Like what? Marcus considered how to explain this concept to a teenager. When people know you have money, they treat you differently. They're nicer to you, but not because they like you. They agree with you, but not because you're right. They invite you to things, but not because they enjoy your company. James stirred his cereal thoughtfully. But isn't that better than people being mean to you because they think you don't have money? That's the question I've been asking myself lately. Emma joined them at the kitchen table, already dressed for school but carrying the serious expression she had worn since discovering the truth about their family's financial situation. Dad, I've been thinking about what you told me, about choosing authenticity over performance. What about it? I think maybe authenticity and performance don't have to be opposites. Maybe sometimes authenticity means performing your actual self instead of pretending to be someone smaller than you really are. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. His 16-year-old daughter had just articulated the central dilemma he had been struggling with for 3 years. What does that look like to you, Em? I think it looks like Bradley Kingsworth learning that the man he's been humiliating is actually more successful than he could ever dream of being. After his children left for school, Marcus made a phone call that would accelerate the timeline for everything that was about to happen. Bobby, it's Marcus. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Tori's father had always been direct in his communication and generous in his judgments of people's character. Despite the divorce, he had maintained a warm relationship with Marcus based on respect and shared values. Marcus, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Emma called me over the weekend. She told me, I hope you understand why I kept the information private. Son, I understand completely. What I don't understand is why you're allowing that pompous jackass to treat you like a charity case. Marcus smiled despite the seriousness of the conversation. Bobby had never been one to soften his opinions with diplomatic language. I've been trying to teach my children that character matters more than wealth. That's admirable, but what lesson are they learning when they watch their father absorb public humiliation without defending himself? The question hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean, Emma and James are watching you choose to look weak when you could choose to look strong. They're learning that having power and refusing to use it is somehow more noble than having power and using it wisely. Bobby paused, letting his words sink in. Marcus, there's a difference between being humble and being invisible. There's a difference between teaching children that money isn't everything and teaching them that success should be hidden like a shameful secret. After the call, Marcus sat in his small office thinking about Bobby's words. Was he teaching his children authentic values, or was he teaching them to be ashamed of success? His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Mr. Kingsworth spent the morning trying to trace the ownership of Hartwell Holdings. He's hired a private investigator and contacted 3 different lawyers. He's taking this very seriously. Marcus typed back, "Good, it's time he learned to take some things seriously." Meanwhile, across town, Bradley was indeed taking things very seriously. The private investigator he had hired was named Jennifer Walsh, and she specialized in corporate intelligence and background investigations for high-net-worth individuals who were accustomed to getting answers quickly. "What can you tell me about Hartwell Holdings?" Bradley asked during their meeting in his restaurant's private dining room. Jennifer consulted her notes. "It's a legitimate investment company incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago. The principal owner is listed as Robert Hartwell, but the financing comes from multiple sources, including something called the Tech Innovation Investment Fund." Tech Innovation Investment Fund? That's where it gets interesting. The fund is managed by Sullivan Asset Management, which is owned by a company called Phoenix Holdings, which is owned by Marcus Sullivan. Bradley felt the blood drain from his face. Marcus Sullivan? The landscaper? Jennifer's expression suggested he was missing something important. Mr. Kingsworth, Marcus Sullivan isn't just a landscaper. He's the founder and former CEO of TechFounder, one of the most successful database security companies in the world. He sold the company 2 years ago for $8.3 billion. The number hit Bradley like a physical blow. $8.3 billion. The man he had been humiliating in public, the man he had offered charity to, the man he had described as a failure, was worth more than 3,000 times Bradley's net worth. That's impossible. It's public record. Forbes magazine profiled him as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of his generation. He's also one of the country's most generous anonymous philanthropists. Bradley's hands began shaking. Anonymous philanthropists? The $50 million donation to the Hartwell Foundation came from his charitable foundation. He's donated over $200 million in the past 3 years, almost all of it anonymously. After Jennifer left, Bradley sat alone in his restaurant trying to process the implications of what he had just learned. Marcus Sullivan was not struggling. Marcus Sullivan was not a failure. Marcus Sullivan was not someone who needed charity or pity or condescending advice about financial management. Marcus Sullivan was extraordinarily, impossibly, embarrassingly successful, and Bradley had spent months publicly humiliating him in front of their mutual community. The realization that he had been mocking a billionaire while thinking he was mocking a struggling landscaper made Bradley physically nauseated. His phone rang. Tori's name appeared on the caller ID. "Bradley, we need to talk." "Not now, Tori. I'm dealing with a crisis." "This is about your crisis. Did you know that Marcus sold his company for over $8 billion? Bradley closed his eyes. "You know?" "I've known something wasn't right about his financial situation for months. The child support payments alone suggested he had significant resources. But $8 billion? Bradley, what have you been doing?" "I've been making a mistake, a very large, very public, very embarrassing mistake." That evening, Tori drove to Marcus's apartment complex for the first time since their divorce was finalized. She sat in her luxury car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, gathering courage for a conversation she should have had months earlier. When Marcus answered his door, he looked surprised but not unwelcoming. "Can we talk?" Tori asked. They sat on his modest couch while Emma and James finished homework in their respective bedrooms. The apartment was clean, comfortable, and clearly home to a family that cared more about each other than about impressing visitors. "Bradley knows," Tori said without preamble. "I figured he'd find out eventually." "Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" Marcus looked at his ex-wife, still beautiful at 39, still the mother of his children, still someone he cared about despite everything that had happened between them. "Because I wanted to know if you chose Bradley for who he was or for what he had. And I wanted to know if our children could love me without money being part of the equation. And now you know." "Now I know." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both thinking about decisions made and paths chosen and consequences that could not be undone. "Marcus, Bradley is scared, really scared. He thinks you're going to destroy him financially." "I'm not interested in destroying anyone, Tori. I'm interested in protecting our children from someone who thinks cruelty is an acceptable form of entertainment." "What does that look like?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in months, Tori saw traces of the man she had married. "It looks like Saturday night's charity gala. It looks like Bradley Kingsworth learning the difference between having money and having class." Mirror technique moment. After Tori left, Marcus found himself standing in his small kitchen, washing dishes from dinner. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses. The routine was meditative and familiar, but tonight it felt different. He realized he was not just cleaning up after a meal. He was preparing for the end of one chapter of his life and the beginning of another. Validation. Whisper. Sometimes protecting the people you love means stopping the people who hurt them, even when stopping them changes everything you've built. Friday evening brought a phone call that changed Marcus's understanding of what he was about to face. The caller was Bobby Hartwell, and his voice carried the weight of information that could not be shared over casual conversation. "Marcus, we need to meet. Tonight. There are things you need to know before tomorrow's gala." They met at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. the kind of place where working people gathered for coffee and conversation at all hours. Bobby had always preferred honest establishments to fancy ones, and tonight the familiar surroundings provided appropriate context for a difficult conversation. Emma told me about your situation, Bobby began without preamble, about tech founder and the money and your decision to live quietly. I hope you understand why I kept it private. Son, I understand completely. What I don't understand is why you're allowing my son-in-law to make a fool of himself by embarrassing you in public. Marcus considered his response carefully. I've been trying to teach my children that character matters more than wealth. That's admirable, but Bradley isn't just embarrassing you anymore. He's planning something for tomorrow night that will humiliate you in front of the entire community. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. What kind of something? Bobby's expression darkened. Catherine Kingersworth let it slip to one of the other board members. Bradley's planning to make a big public show of helping out the struggling single father. He wants to present you with a check for $10,000 in front of everyone at the gala for your landscaping business. The humiliation would be complete and devastating. Public charity offered with condescension in front of 300 of the city's most influential people. Marcus would be transformed from respected community member into object of pity, and his children would have to witness their father's public diminishment. Bobby, I appreciate the warning, but I'm not finished. Bobby's voice carried an edge that Marcus had rarely heard. That man is planning to make my grandchildren watch their father be humiliated on a stage in front of their entire community. Now, I don't know what kind of man you've become over the years, but the Marcus Sullivan I remember wouldn't allow that to happen. After Bobby left, Marcus sat in the diner parking lot calling his mentor and former board member, Grace Thompson. If anyone could help him think through the implications of what he was considering, it would be Grace. Marcus, how wonderful to hear from you. How are Emma and James? Grace had been one of the few people who understood his decision to sell Tech Founder and step away from the public spotlight. She had supported his choice to prioritize family over continued business growth, and her opinion mattered to him more than most. Grace, I need advice about a complicated situation. He explained everything: the divorce, his decision to live simply, Bradley's months of public humiliation, and tomorrow night's planned charity presentation. Grace listened without interruption, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly allowing him to work through the situation aloud. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, do you remember what I told you when you were deciding whether to sell Tech Founder? You said that true power comes from knowing when not to use power. Exactly. But do you remember the rest of what I said? Marcus searched his memory, but could not recall her exact words. I said that sometimes when someone threatens the people you love most, not using your power becomes an act of cowardice disguised as principle. The words hit him like cold water thrown in his face. Your children are watching, Marcus. They're learning what it means to have strength and how to respond when that strength is tested. Tomorrow night, you can teach them that strength means accepting humiliation gracefully, or you can teach them that strength means protecting the people you care about. Grace, if I reveal who I really am, you'll face the consequences of telling the truth. But Marcus, you're already facing the consequences of hiding from it. Your children are ashamed, your ex-wife is confused, and a cruel man is about to make a public spectacle of your family. After ending the call, Marcus walked into his apartment to find Emma and James waiting in the living room. They had clearly been discussing something serious, and their expressions suggested they had reached some kind of mutual decision. Dad, we need to talk about tomorrow night, Emma said. What about tomorrow night? We know what Bradley is planning, James said. Mom called and warned us. She said he wants to give you money in front of everyone like you're some kind of charity case. Marcus felt his chest tighten. His children should not have to carry the burden of adult politics and social manipulation. Kids, whatever happens tomorrow night, Dad, Emma interrupted, you don't have to protect us from the truth anymore. We're old enough to understand that sometimes good people have to make difficult choices. What kind of difficult choices? James looked at his sister, then back at his father. The kind where you stop hiding who you really are and start showing people what real success looks like. Marcus studied his children's faces. Emma was 16, old enough to understand complex social dynamics and their long-term consequences. James was 14, still young but already demonstrating the kind of moral clarity that would serve him well in life. Both of them were asking him to stop protecting them from reality and start trusting them to handle the truth. If I do what you're suggesting, our quiet life will be over. People will treat us differently when they know about the money. Dad, Emma said gently, people are already treating us differently. The difference is that right now they're treating us like we don't matter. And tomorrow night, James added, they're going to treat you like you need their pity. That's not protecting us. That's just a different kind of hurting us. Marcus looked at his children and realized they had grown up without him noticing. Somewhere between childhood and adolescence, they had developed their own sense of justice and their own understanding of when principle becomes stubbornness and when humility becomes self-destruction. Are you sure you're ready for what comes after people know the truth? Both children nodded without hesitation. Then we'll handle tomorrow night together. Mirror technique moment. Late that evening, Marcus found himself standing in his bedroom, looking at the simple black tuxedo hanging in his closet. The suit had been custom-made by one of the world's finest tailors, but it looked unremarkable to anyone who did not understand the difference between expensive and expertly crafted. Like everything else in his life, it was designed to hide its true value. Tomorrow night, he would wear it for the last time as someone's secret. Validation whisper. The loneliest moment isn't when you're by yourself, it's when you're surrounded by people who think they know who you are, and you realize you've forgotten who you actually are. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made formal events feel magical rather than obligatory. The grand ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel had been transformed into an elegant venue worthy of the city's most generous philanthropists and most prominent families. Marcus arrived at exactly 7 o'clock wearing his perfectly tailored black tuxedo and carrying himself with the quiet confidence that had once made him one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the technology industry. He had left Emma and James at home with Sarah Mitchell, who had volunteered to stay with them for the evening. Whatever happened tonight, his children did not need to witness it directly. The seating arrangement was exactly as Sarah had coordinated with the event organizers. Table 13 sat directly adjacent to Table 12, where Bradley and Tori held court with 6 other couples from their social circle. Marcus sat alone at his table, which had been set for 8, but would remain empty except for his place setting. Bradley spotted him immediately and could not resist the opportunity to continue his months-long campaign of public humiliation. Well, look who managed to clean up nicely, Bradley announced loudly enough for several surrounding tables to hear his commentary. Marcus, good to see you could afford to rent a tuxedo for the evening. Polite but uncomfortable laughter rippled around them. Marcus smiled quietly and said nothing, which Bradley interpreted as weakness rather than restraint. Actually, Marcus, I'm glad you're here tonight. I have something very special planned for later in the evening. Tori looked profoundly uncomfortable. Since learning about Marcus's actual financial situation, she had tried repeatedly to convince Bradley to abandon his planned charity presentation. But Bradley had refused to listen, insisting that Marcus needed to learn some hard lessons about his place in their community's social hierarchy. Marcus nodded politely. I'm sure you do, Bradley. The dinner proceeded normally through the first 3 courses. Marcus participated in pleasant conversation with people from neighboring tables who remembered him from school events and community activities. He was well liked by most people who knew him personally, which had made Bradley's campaign of humiliation all the more effective. People genuinely felt sorry for Marcus's apparent financial struggles. During dessert, Bobby Hartwell took the stage to acknowledge the evening's donors and celebrate the foundation's achievements over the past year. He began with smaller contributions and worked his way up to the major gifts that made the foundation's work possible. Local businesses contributed $50,000. Individual donors gave another $120,000. Corporate sponsors added $200,000 to our total. The audience applauded each milestone, genuinely appreciative of their community's generosity. This brings us to tonight's most extraordinary contribution, Bobby continued, and his voice carried a note of barely contained amusement that Marcus recognized from their conversation the previous evening. Earlier this week, our foundation received the largest single donation in our 30-year history. This gift came through the Tech Innovation Charitable Foundation and represents more money than we typically raise in an entire year. The room grew quiet with anticipation. Donations at charity events were often competitive, with wealthy families trying to outdo each other's public generosity. This anonymous donor contributed $50 million to support working families in our community. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. $50 million was an astronomical sum that dwarfed anything the foundation had ever received. People began looking around the room, trying to identify which family could have made such an extraordinary gift. However, Bobby continued, and his smile grew wider, this donor asked me to share something specific with all of you tonight. They wanted everyone here to understand that true generosity isn't about recognition or public praise. It's about seeing need and meeting it quietly, consistently, and without expectation of thanks or acknowledgement. Marcus felt every eye in the room searching for clues about the anonymous donor's identity. Bobby's words seemed directed at someone present, but most people assumed the donor was too modest to reveal themselves. The donor specifically asked that I share this message. The measure of a person isn't what they own, but what they give. And the measure of their character isn't how they treat people who can help them, but how they treat people who cannot help them in return. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The quoted message seemed pointed, almost personal, as if it were directed at someone specific rather than offered as general wisdom. Now, Bobby announced with barely concealed satisfaction, I believe Mr. Bradley Kingsworth has a special presentation to make. This was the moment Bradley had been anticipating for weeks. He stood confidently, adjusted his jacket, and smiled at the 300 guests who were about to witness his grand gesture of charitable superiority. Thank you, Bobby. Yes, I did want to make a special presentation this evening. He looked directly at Marcus, and his confidence seemed to grow with every word. We have among us tonight a hardworking single father who, despite his obviously limited financial means, never misses a school function and never fails to support his children's educational opportunities. The condescension in Bradley's voice was unmistakable to everyone in the room. This was not going to seem a celebration of someone's character. It was going to be a public demonstration of Bradley's superior financial position. Marcus Sullivan works as a landscaper here in our community, and I know that times can be challenging for people in service industries. Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression calm and attentive, as if Bradley were discussing someone else entirely. Bradley pulled out a large ceremonial check that he had prepared for maximum visual impact. So tonight, on behalf of my family, I want to present Marcus with this gift of $10,000 to help support his landscaping business and his children's continued education. The silence in the room was complete and uncomfortable. 300 people watched a wealthy man offer public charity to someone they all assumed was struggling financially. The gesture was generous in amount, but cruel in execution, designed more to demonstrate Bradley's superiority than to actually help Marcus. Marcus stood slowly, and every eye in the room focused on him with a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. That's very generous of you, Bradley, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the silent ballroom. But I'm going to have to decline your offer. Oh, come now, Bradley's voice carried a note of false joviality. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it. You're absolutely right, Marcus replied. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it, just like there's no shame in honest work, regardless of how much money that work generates. He paused, looking around the room at faces he recognized. Business leaders, community pillars, people he had once known in his previous life as a successful entrepreneur. But I think there might be some confusion here tonight about who actually needs help. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He showed the screen to Bobby, who nodded with obvious satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, Bobby's voice carried a completely different tone now. I have just been given permission to reveal the identity of tonight's $50 million anonymous donor. The room held its collective breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the revelation of which family had made such an extraordinary charitable contribution. Marcus Sullivan. The silence that followed was so complete that people could hear the air conditioning system cycling on and off. Bradley's face went white as the implications of Bobby's announcement began to penetrate his understanding. That's impossible, Bradley whispered, but his voice carried in the complete quiet of the room. Marcus smiled sadly, the expression of someone who had hoped it would not come to this, but was no longer surprised that it had. Is it impossible, Bradley? Bobby, would you mind sharing a bit more about tonight's donor? Bobby's grin was now openly delighted. Marcus Sullivan is the founder and former CEO of Tech Founder, which he sold 2 years ago for $8.3 billion. He has been one of our country's most generous, anonymous philanthropists, though he has always preferred to give privately rather than publicly. The room erupted in whispers and exclamations as 300 people simultaneously recalculated everything they thought they knew about Marcus Sullivan. Bradley sank into his chair, still holding the ridiculous ceremonial check that was now revealed as an insult offered to someone whose weekly charitable donations exceeded Bradley's annual income. Mirror technique moment. As the whispered conversation swirled around him, Marcus found himself thinking about all the evenings he had sat in this same hotel ballroom during his marriage to Tori, accepting awards and recognition for business achievements that had felt hollow even at the time. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the first time in years that he was being seen for who he actually was rather than who people assumed he should be. Validation whisper. The most powerful moment isn't when people finally see who you really are. It's when you realize you don't need them to see it for you to know it yourself. The aftermath of Bobby's revelation was swift and comprehensive. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as people processed the information that the man they had pitied for months was actually one of the wealthiest individuals in the room. Business leaders who had ignored Marcus all evening suddenly remembered urgent conversations they needed to have with him. Social climbers began calculating new seating arrangements for future events. But Marcus was not interested in their sudden attention or belated respect. He walked directly to Tori, who sat pale and stunned at table 12, her face a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been relief. "Can we talk privately?" he asked quietly. She nodded, following him to a quiet alcove off the main ballroom where they could speak without being overheard by the 300 people who were now intensely interested in every aspect of Marcus Sullivan's life. "You knew this would happen," she said. It was not a question. "I knew Bradley would eventually push far enough that the truth would have to come out." $8 billion, Marcus, $8 billion, and you let me think you had kept maybe a few million from the sale for security. Marcus looked at his ex-wife, still beautiful at 39, still the mother of his children, still someone whose opinion mattered to him despite everything that had happened between them. "I let you think what you wanted to think, Tori. You assumed I had modest resources, and I never corrected that assumption." "Why?" "Because I wanted to know if you chose Bradley for who he was as a person or for what he represented financially. And I wanted to know if our children could love and respect me without extraordinary wealth being part of the equation. And now you know. Now I know." They stood in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of revelations that could not be undone. Through the archway, they could see Bradley fielding increasingly uncomfortable questions from people who had suddenly realized they had been watching him humiliate a billionaire for months. "Marcus, I need to ask you something," Tori said finally. "If I had known the truth about your net worth, would you have been willing to reconcile?" The question hung between them like a bridge that could never be crossed again. Marcus considered his answer carefully, knowing that his words would define their relationship for the rest of their lives. "Victoria, if you had known about the money, you never would have left in the first place. And that's exactly why I couldn't tell you." The truth of it settled between them with the weight of finality. Their marriage had ended not because of money, but because of what money represented to each of them. For Marcus, wealth was a tool to create security and support causes he believed in. For Tori, wealth was a marker of success and social position that required constant performance and public display. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it. For Bradley's behavior, for the months of embarrassment, for not believing in what we built together." "I'm not sorry," Marcus said gently. "This experience gave me something I never had before. It gave me absolute certainty about who loves me for who I am rather than what I can provide for them." Meanwhile, across the ballroom, Bobby Hartwell was approaching Bradley, who sat alone at his table. Catherine had excused herself to handle urgent business calls, and his dinner companions had suddenly remembered other social obligations that required their immediate attention. "Son," Bobby said, not unkindly but without particular warmth, "you might want to consider apologizing." Bradley looked up, his face a mixture of humiliation, anger, and dawning comprehension of how completely he had misjudged the situation. Apologize for what? He lied to everyone about who he was? Bradley, Marcus lived quietly and honestly. There's a significant difference between those things and lying. He made me look like a fool. Bobby's expression hardened slightly. "Son, you made yourself look like a fool. Marcus just finally stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own behavior. I was trying to help him." "No, you weren't. You were trying to demonstrate your superiority over someone you thought was beneath you socially and financially. The fact that you were wrong about his circumstances doesn't change the cruelty of your intentions." While Bradley struggled with the implications of his situation, Marcus had stepped outside to call his children. The evening air was cool and clean, a welcome contrast to the complicated social dynamics inside the ballroom. "Dad?" Emma answered immediately. "How did it go?" "It went exactly as it needed to go, sweetheart." "Did you tell everyone who you really are?" "I didn't have to tell them. Bradley's planned humiliation forced the truth to come out naturally." "Is he in trouble?" Marcus looked back through the ballroom windows at Bradley, who sat alone at his table while the charity gala continued around him without his participation. "He's learning some very difficult lessons about the difference between having money and having character. But everyone deserves the opportunity to grow from their mistakes." "Dad?" James's voice joined the conversation. Emma had put the call on speaker so both children could participate. "Yes, James? Are you happy that you finally told everyone the truth?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I'm happy that I stopped hiding from the truth. There's an important difference." "What happens now?" "Now we go home and figure out what our life looks like when we don't have to pretend to be smaller than we actually are." When Marcus returned to the ballroom, he found Grace Thompson waiting at his table. His former mentor and board member had arrived late to the gala and missed the dramatic revelation, but she had clearly been brought up to speed by other attendees. "Well," she said with a knowing smile, "that was beautifully handled." "Was it? I feel like I just destroyed a man's reputation in public." "Marcus, you didn't destroy Bradley's reputation, you revealed it. There's a crucial difference between those two things." Grace was right, Marcus realized. Bradley's character had been on full display for months. Marcus had simply stopped deflecting attention away from Bud. "The question now," Grace continued, "is what you do with this newfound visibility. People are going to expect things from you that they didn't expect before." "What kind of things?" "Leadership, philanthropy beyond anonymous donations, possibly business ventures or investment opportunities. The luxury of invisibility that you've enjoyed for 3 years is over." As if to illustrate her point, the watching. Marcus noticed several people approaching their table with expressions that suggested they had business propositions or charitable requests to discuss. Word of his net worth was spreading through the room like water finding its level. "Grace, I chose the quiet life specifically to avoid this kind of attention. Sometimes life chooses for us, regardless of our preferences. The question is whether you'll use this platform wisely or spend your energy trying to get back to invisibility that's no longer possible." Before Marcus could respond, he was approached by Catherine Kingsworth, Bradley's sister, who managed events for the city's social elite. Her expression was professional but apologetic. "Mr. Sullivan, I owe you an apology on behalf of my family." "That's not necessary, Catherine." "I'm afraid it is necessary. My brother's behavior toward you has been inexcusable, and it reflects poorly on all of us who allowed it to continue without intervention." Marcus studied Catherine's face. Unlike her brother, she seemed genuinely remorseful rather than simply embarrassed by the social awkwardness of the situation. "Catherine, your brother made assumptions based on incomplete information. We all do that sometimes." "Perhaps, but making assumptions and acting cruelly based on those assumptions are two different choices. Bradley chose cruelty, and that choice says something about his character that has nothing to do with your financial circumstances." The evening began winding down with a series of interactions that demonstrated how quickly social dynamics could shift when new information became available. People who had ignored Marcus for months suddenly found him fascinating. Business cards appeared from nowhere. Invitations to exclusive events materialized. Investment opportunities were mentioned casually in passing. Marcus accepted the cards politely and deflected the invitations diplomatically, but he was not interested in leveraging his revealed wealth into social advancement. He had never wanted to be part of the performance that wealth often required, which was precisely why he had stepped away from it 3 years earlier. As the evening concluded, Tori approached him one final time. "Marcus, what happens now, between us, I mean?" "Nothing changes between us, Tori. We're still divorced. We're still Emma and James's parents. We still need to work together to raise children who understand that character matters more than money. But people will treat us differently now. People will treat me differently. Your situation doesn't change at all." Tori considered this. Her marriage to Bradley, her social position, her daily life would continue exactly as before. But her understanding of the choice she had made when she left Marcus was now fundamentally altered. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. "You made the choice that felt right to you at the time with the information you had available. That's all any of us can do. But if you had known about the money, you would have stayed for the wrong reasons. If you had stayed for the wrong reasons, we would have been miserable together instead of happy apart. Sometimes the mistakes we think we've made turn out to be the choices that save us from bigger mistakes." As Marcus drove home in his 10-year-old Honda Civic, he reflected on Grace's warning about the end of invisibility. Tomorrow his phone would start ringing with opportunities and requests and obligations that came with public wealth. Reporters might want interviews, charities would request meetings, business partners would propose ventures. But tonight, he was simply driving home to his modest apartment where his children were waiting to hear about their father's first evening as someone who no longer had to hide his success. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, we saw the news story online. The headline says, 'Secret billionaire revealed at charity gala.' You look like a superhero in that picture where you're politely declining Bradley's fake charity check." Marcus smiled, pulling into his apartment complex parking lot, the same modest building he had called home for 3 years and would continue to call home regardless of what anyone now knew about his bank account. Inside, Emma and James were waiting on the couch with a homemade banner that read, "Welcome home, billionaire dad, who still has to take out the trash." "Very funny," Marcus said, but he was genuinely laughing for the first time in weeks. "Dad," James said with mock seriousness, "does this mean we can finally get that new PlayStation?" "Did you earn money for a new PlayStation?" "Well, no, but then no. Some things never change." Emma grinned. "Some things never change, but some things do." "Like what?" "Like now everyone knows that our dad is successful not because he has money, but because he raised kids who love him for who he is rather than what he can buy for them." Mirror technique moment. Later that evening, Marcus stood in his small bathroom, looking at his reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. It was the same nightly routine he had followed for 3 years, but tonight something was different. Instead of avoiding extended eye contact with himself, he studied his own face and realized he was looking at someone who no longer had to apologize for his success or hide from his achievements. Validation whisper. The greatest victory isn't proving that you're more successful than someone who underestimated you. It's realizing that you never needed their validation to know your own worth. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn sunlight that makes ordinary moments feel significant. Marcus woke early, as was his habit, but instead of immediately checking his phone for messages from Sarah about business matters, he lay in bed listening to the sounds of his children getting ready for the day. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. His phone showed 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and 112 emails. Word of the previous evening's revelation had spread beyond the charity gala attendees to the broader community and apparently to business networks across the country. Sarah had already sent him a preliminary list of interview requests from financial publications, investment opportunities from former colleagues, and meeting requests from charitable organizations. But first, there was breakfast to make and a family conversation to have. Emma and James were already at the kitchen table when Marcus emerged from his bedroom. They had prepared coffee for him and cereal for themselves, and they looked at him expectantly. "So," Emma said without preamble, "what happens now?" Marcus poured himself coffee and sat down at their small kitchen table, the same table where they had eaten thousands of meals together, solved homework problems, and had conversations about everything from school drama to global politics. What do you think should happen now? I think, James said carefully, that maybe we don't have to live like we're apologizing for being successful anymore. The observation was remarkably mature for a 14-year-old, and it cut straight to the heart of what Marcus had been struggling with for 3 years. What would that look like to you? Emma answered first. It would look like you not having to pretend that $10 is a lot of money when we go shopping. It would look like us being able to help people without having to hide the fact that we're helping them. It would look like, James added, you not having to let people be mean to you just because they think you can't fight back. Marcus studied his children's faces. They had both grown up significantly in the past week, not because of the money, but because of watching their father navigate complex moral and social choices. Are you ready for people to treat you differently when they know about our financial situation? Dad, Emma said gently, people already treat us differently. The difference is that now they might treat us with respect instead of pity. After breakfast, Marcus made the first of what would be many phone calls about the previous evening's events. He called Bobby Hartwell to thank him for his support and his discretion in managing the revelation. Marcus, you don't need to thank me for anything. I just told the truth about who made that donation. I know, but you told it in a way that preserved everyone's dignity, including Bradley's. Speaking of Bradley, you should know that he called me this morning. He wants to apologize to you personally. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? I told him that apologies work best when they're offered directly to the person who was wronged, not delivered through intermediaries. And what did he say to that? He said he was too embarrassed to call you himself, but he also said he was starting to understand the difference between being wealthy and being successful. After ending the call with Bobby, Marcus spent an hour returning phone calls from people who had attended the gala and wanted to express their support or apologize for not intervening when Bradley had been treating him poorly. The conversations were uniformly kind but uniformly awkward, as people struggled to find appropriate language for acknowledging that they had misjudged someone's circumstances so completely. The most difficult call came from Catherine Kingsworth. Mr. Sullivan, I'm calling on behalf of my brother. He would like to meet with you privately to apologize for his behavior and to discuss how he might make amends for the months of public humiliation he subjected you to. Catherine, that's not necessary. Bradley doesn't owe me anything. With respect, sir, I think he does owe you something. At minimum, he owes you an acknowledgement that his treatment of you was wrong, regardless of your financial circumstances. Marcus agreed to meet with Bradley that afternoon at a neutral location. They chose the same diner where he had met with Bobby the previous evening, a place where honest conversations could happen without the pressure of formal settings. Bradley arrived 15 minutes early and had clearly been waiting nervously when Marcus walked in. He looked like a man who had not slept well and had spent considerable time thinking about uncomfortable truths. Marcus, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. They sat across from each other in a booth near the back of the diner, two men who had been locked in an unequal conflict that had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Bradley, before you say anything, I want you to know that I don't hold any personal animosity toward you. That almost makes it worse, Bradley replied quietly. You should be angry with me. I was cruel to you for months, and I was cruel to you in front of your children and mine. Why were you cruel to me? The question was not accusatory but genuinely curious, as if Marcus were trying to understand the psychology behind Bradley's behavior rather than simply condemning it. Bradley considered his answer carefully. Because I thought you were weak, and I thought that weakness threatened my position in Tori's life and in our social circle. And now I realize that you were never weak. You were just choosing not to use your strength in ways that I would have used it. And I realize that my need to diminish you said more about my insecurities than it did about your circumstances. They sat in silence for several minutes, both men processing the implications of honesty that had been delayed for far too long. Bradley, what do you want from this conversation? I want to apologize sincerely for my behavior. And I want to ask if there's anything I can do to make amends for the damage I've caused. Marcus looked across the table at a man who had spent months trying to humiliate him publicly, and he felt something unexpected. Compassion. The apology is enough, Bradley, but I do have one request. Anything. Emma and James are going to continue attending school functions and community events where your children are present. I need to know that you won't let your embarrassment about this situation affect how you treat my kids. Marcus, I would never take my mistakes out on Emma and James at their sons. Good, because they're good kids who deserve to grow up in a community where adults model better behavior than what they've witnessed recently. As they prepared to leave the diner, Bradley asked one final question. Marcus, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why didn't you ever fight back? You could have ended my campaign against you at any time just by telling people who you really were. Marcus considered the question as they walked toward their cars. Because I wanted to know if my children could love and respect me without extraordinary wealth being part of the equation. And I wanted to know if I could be happy with a simple life, even though I had the resources to live any way I chose. And now you know? Now I know that my children love me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. And I know that happiness comes from relationships and purpose, not from possessions or social position. Those are expensive lessons to learn. Marcus smiled. Actually, they were free. Everything else was the expensive part. That evening, Marcus sat in his small home office reviewing the investment reports and charitable foundation updates that Sarah had compiled for his review. The numbers were impressive. His anonymous donations over the past 3 years had funded literacy programs, medical research, environmental conservation projects, and scholarship funds that had changed thousands of lives. Emma knocked on his doorframe. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Are you glad this happened? Are you glad people finally know the truth? Marcus saved his work and turned to face his daughter. I'm glad I don't have to hide anymore. I'm glad you and James don't have to feel ashamed of having a successful father. And I'm glad Bradley learned something about the difference between having money and having character. What do you think will happen to him? I think he'll probably become a better person because of this experience. Sometimes getting humbled is exactly what someone needs to grow up. Emma smiled. So in a weird way, you helped him by letting him be mean to you for so long? In a very weird way, yes, though I hope he learns those lessons faster next time. Later that evening, as Marcus was finishing the dishes from dinner, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something prompted him to answer. Mr. Sullivan, this is Jennifer Walsh. I'm the private investigator Bradley Kingsworth, hired to research your background. I remember. What can I do for you, Jennifer? I wanted to call personally to tell you that I've returned Mr. Kingsworth's retainer fee and ended our professional relationship. Wait, Bonwell, because after learning about your actual circumstances and your charitable work, I realized that researching you wasn't about legitimate business concerns. It was about someone trying to find ammunition to use against a good person who didn't deserve that kind of treatment. Marcus was touched by the gesture. Thank you, Jennifer. That wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it. Actually, it was necessary, for my own conscience, if nothing else. As Marcus prepared for bed that evening, he realized that the previous day's events had set in motion changes that would affect not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who had been involved in the situation. Bradley would have to rebuild his reputation and his relationships. Tori would have to reconsider her assumptions about success and security. Emma and James would have to learn how to navigate a world where people knew their family had significant wealth. But for tonight, they were still just a father and his 2 children living in a modest apartment, getting ready for school and work the next morning, and sharing the same love and respect they had always shared. The money hadn't changed that. Nothing ever would. Sure technique moment. Marcus stood at his bedroom window one last time, looking out at the quiet apartment complex that had been home for 3 years. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make about whether to stay or move, about how public to be with his philanthropy, about what role he wanted to play in the community's business and social networks. But tonight, everything was peaceful and familiar and exactly as it should be. Validation. Whisper. True wealth isn't about how much money you have in the bank. It's about having people in your life who would love you the same way if you had nothing at all. Circular ending. The next morning, Marcus put on his work clothes and drove to his first landscaping appointment of the week. Because some things, the important things, never change. He still found peace in working with soil and growing things. He still believed in the dignity of honest work, and he still understood that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased at any price. But now, when people asked him about his landscaping business, he could answer honestly. He did it because he loved it, not because he had to. And that, Marcus realized, made all the difference in the world. And that's how Marcus Sullivan proved that true strength isn't about flashing your wealth. It's about knowing when to use it. Now, I'm curious, what would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have revealed the truth sooner, or would you have let Bradley keep digging his own grave? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story hit you the way it hit me, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover these incredible true stories about justice, karma, and people getting exactly what they deserve. And hey, if you're new here and you love stories about underdogs, hidden billionaires, and bullies getting their comeuppance, you're going to love what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because I've got more stories that'll restore your faith that good things really do happen to good people. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated can actually be your greatest strength. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being yourself. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.